Welcome to Wine Country at Work from the beautiful Napa Valley with your host, Ralph D. Meekus. Next, Ralph interviews Joe Papendick, the head gardener at Raymond Vineyards, about how he uses biodynamics daily.
So when you came to Raymond, how developed was the property? How developed was the theater of nature?
It was conceptual only. So from the tasting room door all the way out here, this entire space around me was just a field, a dirt, completely barren. There was no plants at all. So from here all the way out to Zinfandel Lane, they were going to replant the vineyard as well as the garden was in the concept stage. And so we were beginning to break ground on that. That was 4 years ago now that we broke ground on this spot.
That's a remarkable amount of progress.
Thank you.
If you look at it. Also, it's interesting, I remember you telling me that when they replanted the vineyards, they realigned them as well. Mm-hmm. They changed the direction of them. And it must have been quite a change from years of conventional farming to biodynamics.
Yeah, well, bringing back the life. And so that was a big part of it, realigning with the orientation for the sun and for the wind and for the timing of the grape varieties that are being planted here for when they mature, as well as for the garden and just introducing native plants that provide a host for beneficial insects that can develop soil biology and bring back soil health and bring back life onto the property and the diversity that already is here occurring in the valley, but giving it its home. Right. And so I can see the improvement in our plants through being organic and biodynamic, and the improvement in the health and the life, the health of the ecosystem that has resulted in transitioning to biodynamic and organic, and also the resistance to disease and pests that has come through growing plants organically and biodynamically. But I can't say how it is affected by having a neighbor that's organic or biodynamic.
Right.
Or having a neighbor who's growing conventionally.
Right.
So I guess it creates a patchwork throughout the valley where you don't have the same open corridors. So if you had, for example, neighbors who were all organic and biodynamic, then you could coordinate hedgerow plantings and other plantings throughout that would allow for a corridor below the soil or above the soil of wildlife.
How important is biodiversity in a garden?
It's essential. I mean, in a garden, if you're trying to grow even just one tomato plant for yourself, that needs to be supported by a myriad of different plants and animals and life. And so in order to have the best tomato plant, you need to have your supporting role and your characters that are there around you. So that either comes through cover crops that you planted before, what you planted before the tomato plant was planted, with what's around the tomato plant to bring in beneficial insects that can be your first line of defense against pests or even against disease as well, to help deter and create an environment that'll be healthy for that plant. And I recently saw a quote that I liked. It kind of goes to this. It's when the flower's dying, you don't go to the flower and say, why is the flower dying? You say, what happened? Why is it not caring? Am I not watering it? Do I not take care of the soil? What am I doing? So that's the same aspect of, what are you doing to support the plant, and then how will the plant perform in that experience? And so the big part with biodiversity here is, well, with your natives and your hedgerow plantings, and bringing what is here, what nature has native, and that has a whole thousands of beneficial insects that can then support the other plants that you're growing for agriculture, and have that balance. When you just have one plant, you can have one pest come out and wipe the whole thing. Right. And it's dangerous. It's a fine line. And so then you use one chemical to spray on it, as opposed to having thousands of different plants and animals that can be there for your defense.
Yeah, the danger of monoculture.
Yes.
It's always a big issue. Yeah. I think it's interesting that when Rudolf Steiner did his lectures, he basically said to the farmers, you got to realize, I'm not a farmer. You have to prove this stuff.
Yes.
When you're selecting the plants to put together, are there guidelines? Are there written guidelines, or is it passed down as a whole
That's
tradition?
The trickiest part with biodynamics. Is there's Rudolf Steiner, who gave his lectures. They weren't written documents or a written recipe. It was open to interpretation, and to be certified, we want to have a way that we can have a matrix to see what we're doing. Right. And so the certification agencies have come together and have created sort of that recipe of what to put in. What's the minimum that you can do? And then you go and you visit biodynamic farms, and everyone's, of course, always being honed to their site. What's successful in their location? And so while maybe the recipe for what was in Europe at that time may not be applicable to what we're doing here, we try to, and we bring in what we can. And conveniently, a lot of the plants that are in the biodynamic lectures are native to California as well. And they're occurring here, and they occur in Europe, they occur in the United States, and so they are applicable. But but finding how they work with our seasons. A big part right now is when do we time the bearing of the preparations and digging out of the preparations, and how does that go with our, like when California, when things are waking up right now, and it's time to spray the preparation 500, may not be corresponding with what's happening in Europe because they're still under snow, or even on the East Coast, or even in their parts of the United States. So finding the fine tunings of when is it appropriate for our location, and how does the earth respond, and how can we respond with it. So a big part of that's just knowing your site, seeing how your site is changing every year, and how can you improve it so that it's always getting better and healthier. Yeah. So it's evolving and learning your site, learning what plants respond, and bring in the whether it's an energy that plant has, whether it's a nutritional quantity that plant has, whether it's the biodiversity of attracting all of the native plants, native insects benefits that are there. It's all of the above, and having all that. The biggest part to biodynamics I see is the connection. Everything has to be interconnected, and so you want to open up those connections between the plant world, the human world, and what's going on around us, and even up to the cosmos. And so allowing those connections to occur, and you have to be present on the site to find those.
And how do you feel you are along in your personal process 4 years later?
I've always looked at 7 years as being like a learning curve, and you always have to remember in agriculture, a season, you have kind of 1 year to do something. So if I'm going to plant, go back to the tomato or to the grapevine, we're going to try one thing for a year, and then you got to do it one more time.
Right.
That's next year, and you can fine tune with some other crops and other things more and more and throughout the year, and have times to do kind of more experiments or get in touch with how things react with rain runoff or soil retention, or plant different cover crops and then be able to see how they're responding. But it's a slow process, and it's always one that you're learning. Every year you're learning, and also if you're making a mistake, it may take 3 or 4 years to figure out what's the source of what you've done that's created what's reaction. And sort of figuring out to fine tune things, because sometimes you may have an idea, that's been the compost I've been applying, or my compost recipe is creating this reaction. And oh no, actually, so we were in 3 years of drought. Now we're in a year of rain. What's going to happen there? Was it a water issue, or was it a soil issue, or is it both? And how are all those things interlocked? So to watch a property evolve, it's always evolving, and it's always going to hopefully, well, the goal is to be in tune to it so it's always better. So you're always leaving it for the next year in a better condition. And so the minute you see a decline or something that's stressed or having it needs support, figuring out how you can bring that support into the property, into the system, and having the whole property be balanced in that way.
Right.
So it's constantly an evolution and constantly evolving. But seeing this property from bare soil, I mean, I can see the garden beds and their performance, and the yields are increasing, and the disease resistance is getting stronger. I saw that in 3 years.
Really?
So you can begin to see how things have evolved. And now I'm learning how to fine tune how much to irrigate, and reducing the irrigation because of the imperformance in the soil, as things also get established too, and move away from, especially with a lot of the plants that we had to plant brought in from nurseries, and not things that we started here ourselves, and what we started ourselves versus what can be here. The volunteers, the plants that have been sown through seeds that have been broadcasted in the wind, or seeds that have been harvested elsewhere and then dropped on site, and those ones, as they become established, the site begins to really develop its own personality, and then that begins to speak for itself too, of what works here, what is successful here.
What's been the dominant volunteer plant that's shown up here?
The one that I've allowed to remain, that I'm happy with, is the coyote bush. And so that's some over here. There's some also on our behind the light green, the dark green plant. That's coyote bush. That's a California native, and it's one of our plants that host to tens of thousands of insects. So very important for the bird community. The birds love coming into coyote bush because there's a lot of insects to eat in there, but also those insects are, there's some beneficial native California bees, parasitic wasps, different things like that come with that plant, that live with that plant, and then those are beneficial for attacking pests that are in your garden as well. So finding that balance. And those are ones that have all volunteered, and they need no irrigation. I mean, it's part of California. So they're here, and if I don't pull them out when I'm weeding, they'll thrive.
You're in a unique situation in that you came onto a property that was bare earth, and then you were given a mandate to create, with your team, create an educational vineyard.
It's an exciting challenge. It's one that it was one of the challenges that I appreciated with the position, to be able to have a bare slate and allow a garden to come out of the ground from there. And so definitely there's the educational component and the narrative and goals that the garden needs to be productive and producing, and a demonstration for the success of biodynamics. And then going back kind of to the Steiner, to what's the recipe to put in here, this was allowing we had our goals for what we've seen in other successful gardens in California. And so it's bringing the inspiration from those gardens. How could we make it have its own personality at the same time relate to these other successful gardens and techniques that have been already practiced for 30 to 40 to 60 years in California.
I didn't realize that biodynamics had that long of a tradition here. I guess organics go back that far, though.
What's difficult with the word biodynamic is it's not always used. And so you have to look at the practices and who's farming and the technique that they're using. Because a lot of the original natural, holistic horticulturalists who arrived in California, and so the one that kind of inspired me and kind of I began to learn, I didn't learn directly from him, but there's Alan Chadwick, who came to the University of California in Santa Cruz in the early 60s when University of California had just started in Santa Cruz. And he was a student of Steiner. He studied directly under Steiner, and he came out, he was a gardener, horticulturalist who went around the world doing other garden products, and then was brought into Santa Cruz to develop their garden program there. And he didn't use the word biodynamic, but he invoked all of the forces that were out there and really wanted to develop a garden to speak for itself, and was a brilliant horticulturalist, and was all about taking it in and learning about it in the experience. Hands-on, you dive in, but you bring in these plants and the health of the plant and the health of the site through the Steiner and through biodynamic philosophy that he'd been raised with.
Interesting.
We hope you found this Insider's Look entertaining. Come back and join us for another episode of Wine Country at Work.
You're quite the handsome bird. Yes, you are.